Welcome back to the Nuckhead podcast. Hope you guys are having a good week, or I guess because I didn't make an episode last week, I hope you had a good 2 weeks. The Canucks keep winning and then losing and then winning and then losing. I'm losing my hair and losing my voice as well. Broke 7 TVs. It's very, very frustrating. And everybody keeps getting injured. And when they're not getting injured, they're almost getting injured. Like Quinn Hughes against the Jets the other day. Goes down, I'm at the game by the way, goes down, looks to be injured, I'm freaking out, goes down the tunnel even, but then the Canucks get a power play and he's right back out there and he finishes the game. However, I just looked at a tweet from Dan Murphy that said, unless my eyes deceive me, there's no Quinn Hughes or Drew O'Connor on the ice for the Canucks at the Hurricanes practice facility right now. What? Stop! Please! Quinn Hughes is obvious, but just as Drew O'Connor starts getting his offense going, he's injured. Now, look, they could just be taking a break, and by the time you're hearing this, maybe there's been an update and everything's fine. But it could also not be fine, because that's the way this season's been going. Anyways, I don't want to crash out like 3 seconds into this intro. Today, we have a very special guest for the second time in the podcast's history. Satiar Shah will be joining us. He's the host of Canucks Central. He talks in between periods during the games. I don't know why I'm telling you who he is. If you're a Canucks fan, you know who Satiar Shah is, okay? Yeah, we're going to talk about the Canucks start to the season, the injuries surrounding the team, Quinn Hughes, his future, and how he's played so far this season, the Demko injury, everything you can think of, basically. So, yeah, let's just get into it. All right, Satiar Shah, welcome back to the Nuckhead podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Excited to chat hockey with you again.
Last time we spoke was almost to the day a year ago. We were 11 games into the 2024-25 season. Canucks had a record of 6-2-3. JT Miller was here. Rick Tocchet was head coach. And not to put you on the spot, but you said the Canucks were one blue liner away from becoming a top-tier cup contender, which I fully agreed with. I'd probably push it a bit further back then. And we chatted about which defenders they might be interested in, from Bowen Byram to Dante Fabro. But the main concern around the team at the time was Thatcher Demko's injury. And now today, 18 games in, record of 8-9-1. Miller's gone. Tocchet's gone, and the fan base is split on whether the Canucks are one second-line center away from being a playoff contender or a few more losses away from needing to rebuild. And the main concern today is, again, Thatcher Demko's injury. So my first question for you is a pretty easy one. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think one day we're going to have a really good 30 for 30 about the Vancouver Canucks from 2024 to 2025 or almost 2026, because, I mean, things just went sideways. I mean, you know what happened last year, of course, and you know, it's bewildering still, because I always think back to the vibe and the feelings heading into last season. And yeah, there were some concerns about defense, like you talked about, and things that they needed to improve on. But that's such a promising year that you just assumed you add to this team, you're going to be taken off. But you know, one thing that is always unpredictable is human nature, and human nature sometimes can get the better of people. And we saw that with JT and Pettersson, and overall what happened with that group last year, and that's really what sunk that season. And now they lost to one of the premier centers in the game. You know, maybe not a number one franchise level center like the McDavid McKinnons, but we know when JT's at his best and Pettersson was at his best, it was a pretty formidable 1-2 duo. And since then, Pettersson has still struggled to regain his form. I think for him, a lot of it still comes down to confidence. It's clearly been shattered over the past year, and he's still struggling to find it. We've seen some improvements from time to time, but it's still a struggle to for his game to get to the level it needs to be at. And as far as where we find ourselves now, I mean, it's injuries are the biggest thing, and I think that's the biggest problem this team is facing right now. And I don't know if there's much you can do to prevent, guys from getting injured the way these guys have been falling apart this year. But, it's just unfortunate that a Canucks team that looked to be on such a good track that we're so excited about got in its own way because people just could not find a way to get along, get on to the same page. And, that's ultimately the most frustrating part of things, because if you had JT and Pedersen still here and those guys are getting along, I think we would be feeling a lot different about their struggles this season and their ability to get through it.
Yeah, I'm not a big curse guy, but what's occurred over the past 2 or 3 seasons is hard to explain.
Yeah.
It's bonkers. I would have never believed any of this would have happened. What percentage would you say could be blamed on injuries when it comes to the Canucks' mediocre start? I know you mentioned it's
Mhm.
definitely a factor, no question there. But that's kind of the big debate right now. Is when you split the fan base and media into two sections, whether you want to rebuild or I guess maybe in the soft middle is a retool, but it's really between rebuild and I guess bulk up. And the main question is: are the Canucks good or are they just injured? Where do you
Yeah.
stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, before the season began, I had the Canucks making the playoffs. I had them as being a playoff team. I don't think they were in the, obviously not a cup contender. I don't even think they were in that second tier. Like last year, we talked about how they were in that kind of second tier heading into the season, maybe a
Mhm.
defenseman short of really pushing forward. I think they've dropped down from that tier because of, obviously the lack of depth down the middle. And also Pedersen hasn't been that type of player. If Pedersen was playing at an elite 1C level, then you would feel a lot better about, okay, maybe you are one center short from getting back to where you were last year, for instance, and now some of that stuff's a bit uncertain. You get a center back, and you still truly, in that tier where you need to kind of be. But I still had this team being a playoff squad because look at the goaltending. You had Lankinen and Demko, and the defense. For all the concerns we had about the defense last year, it looks really good on paper. Now they've had some struggles with their team game, which I wouldn't put on the individual players defensively, which we can get to at some point here, but. I still really like the makings of their blue line. I mean, they have four veterans who are capable. I know Myers has his ups and downs, but very capable when he's under control. I like what I've seen from Villander. Love what I see from Villander. DPD looks promising. Even Forbert, when he's healthy, helps the PK. Mancini gives you depth. So looking at that blue line, looking at that goalie tandem, and overall, as much as they have some center depth issues, I looked at that center position and the forward group and said, yeah, it's not perfect. It's probably, not even really middle of the pack. But with that defense and goaltending, and a lot of teams have poor defenses. A lot of teams have trouble with their goaltending. The Canucks should be a playoff team if they can stay healthy. But obviously, the whole healthy part hasn't really happened. And, you want to put a percentage on it? I think if this team was healthy, I think they probably have at least what 3 or 4 more points in the standings. At least three. Let's be, that's like not overstate things. Let's say they're one game above 500 or something, which still is better than where you kind of find yourself right now. And I think you'd feel a lot different about their chances of being a playoff team despite having a couple injuries. But it's just really hard for a team to have success when the only center you have who's capable of shift in and shift out to play at even a average to above average level is Elias Pettersson. And we've seen some good things from Ratu at times, but still a young player trying to learn and figure out how to play in the NHL. Reichel brings a lot of positives, but not clearly an everyday center. Sassen's brought a lot of speed and effort, and I like his potential, but a young player still trying to learn how to play in the NHL and still, learning through experience when he's on the ice, the good and the bad. And it's just really hard to survive when you have one center and two, three other guys who really aren't everyday centers yet or haven't proven to be that. And I think that gives you such a competitive disadvantage against other teams. And we see where the Canucks struggle on the PK specifically as well. And that a lot of it comes down to, the lack of options you have down the middle. So I put, most of their struggles this year to injuries. Of course, they were thin down the middle coming in. We all kind of wondered, do you need another center? And injuries are inevitable, no doubt. Things are going to happen, and you have to have depth to overcome those sort of things. But I don't think there's a question that the Canucks are far worse than they actually are because of this injury crisis, which has been, I want to say unprecedented because you've been around long enough, and even if you've been a fan for 10 to 15 years or 20 years, 5 years, 30 years, we know injuries have always been a part of life. Like we can never assume that injuries never happen in Vancouver. It's just kind of been the way things are, and like you said, maybe a curse, who knows? But yeah, I do think the injuries are a big reason why this team has struggled even more. Like, yeah, maybe they're not a cup contender. I don't think anybody agreed that they were, but I don't think this should have been as bad as they've been so far if they had a couple of guys healthy. It's really hard to live life when you have no centers in the lineup, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that the year they went to the second round, you had Miller and Pettersson both. I mean, Pettersson tapered off near the end of the season there,
Hmm.
but for the most part, they were both playing like one Cs. And
Yeah.
now, I mean, I don't want to pile up on Pettersson, but yeah, I mean, it's been clear. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence with, is it possible as he's matured and his game's matured, and obviously, being coached by Talkett, I think probably had a part in this, that he's just kind of changed his game, and maybe we're dealing with more of a Barkov type player than we are a McKinnon type player. Because I've seen those clips, those highlights, the moments where he has the puck on his stick and you're screaming shoot and he doesn't. And I can't ignore those. That does seem like a
Hmm.
confidence issue or an overthinking issue for sure. But he's, as inconsistent as he's been offensively this season, defensively, I mean, you can't complain. He's playing like a 1C defensively, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, he's been fantastic, and he has maybe not been one of the two or three best defensive centers in the NHL, but he's been up there amongst the better defensive centers in the NHL, especially when you consider the degree of difficulty he's had. I mean, the only other center who's handled as difficult of minutes when it comes to matchups and zone starts, as in being starting your own zone, is Dylan Larkin in Detroit. Everybody else has a far
Mhm.
more favorable deployment usage, and Pettersson's has been about as hard as it gets in the National Hockey League. And so when you consider that, he's been excellent defensively. There's no doubt about it. And even when Pettersson came into the league, the player that he was often kind of compared to, and the reason I really loved his game coming out was he looked like a two-way centerman that could be in the mold of a Pavel Datsyuk type. Yeah, I mean, he might be able to give you 100
Totally.
points like he has at times, but he might be a player who's in that point per game range, anywhere from 80 to 90 points, but he brings incredible defensive value. And when you have that, like, I think that's more valuable than having a pure offensive 100-point player. Like, I love the two-way players. And I do think the defensive side of the game, for the most part of his career, has been good, even better now. I mean, look at the block shots. He's been better
Yeah.
in his own zone. The one area he struggles, unlike some of those other premier, high level Barkov, Kopitar types, has been on the PK. Now, it's hard to blame the PK issues on him, and he's not his fault, but he hasn't yet shown that he can be a high level penalty killer, and that's one edge those other guys kind of have. And his production needs to tick up a little bit. Like, even Barkov, the last few years, like, he's essentially been a point per game. He's always around,
Yeah.
like I think he played 70 some games last year, had 80 points. He's always kind of been in, if he's played 60 games, he's had 65 points, or 57 games, had 55 points. Like, he's always kind of been around a point per game. And Kopitar, similarly, like, he was at least always in that 70-point range. So there was a couple of down years here and there, but he was always kind of around, 70 to 80 points over the course of an 80-game season. And if Pettersson can be at that level, 70 to 80 points, and he's playing the same way defensively, then I think we can feel really good and be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe he's not the offensive dynamo we had hoped to see, but can you how much more value do you place on having a near point per game player who's excellent defensively? So I don't even think that his game has to, improve by leaps and bounds offensively. He has to go out there and score 100 points, but can he tick up a bit? Can you get him to a point where we're sitting here 30 games in and he's at 29 points, 30 points? And if he gets to that level, I think we feel a lot better about his long-term ability to be a difference maker for this team.
Yeah. And, it's weird because we do have Braden Coots coming up, and obviously, he's only 18, and he impressed at training camp, obviously. So
Hmm.
I don't want to put too many expectations on him. But with the whole Hughes and is he going to resign and trying to impress him, hiring Foot, all this stuff, behind the scenes, we do have Pettersson locked up long term, which I know some people
Hmm.
want to riot about, but we do have him locked up long term,
Yeah.
and we have a young center coming up. Like, if Hughes was already signed for 8 more years, the I feel like the future would feel a bit more bright, because right now it's very doom and gloom.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the other part of this too, which I find really interesting because, of course, I understand people are frustrated. Of course, I understand people have lost confidence in organizational direction over the years because the team hasn't always done what's necessary. And I know people want to embrace a longer term outlook and a plan to bring more youth into the lineup. But it's not like we're sitting here and talking about one of the older teams in the National Hockey League. They're still one of the younger teams in the league. Yeah, of course, some key players are a bit older and, in that late 20s, early 30s range. And how do they fit in say, 4 to 5 years? But if you look at Villander, DPD, for instance, I mean, you mentioned Hughes. Hughes isn't too old. Pettersson's not too old. You have Mancini coming through. Hronek, another guy's turning 28. And we're not talking about a guy who's, in his 30s already or whatever it is. So, I mean, you still have a lot of key players that are in the prime of their careers or just entering the league and learning how to play in the game. So I think if there if Hughes was locked up long term, I think this is a great point by you too, that if Hughes was locked up long term, people would have a different outlook about the team. Yeah, there'd be some questions about how do you add some high end talent, what happens with Pettersson, what do you have to do? But you can at least look at it and say, well, the blue line's pretty much figured out, not only with your high end, but you have the young guys coming up that look good. Plus, you have more depth in the minors. Braden Coots looks to be an NHL player. Like, he's going to be an NHL player next season. The question's just going to come down to ceiling. And none of us really know what it's going to be. Is he going to be a higher end player? Is he going to be more of a second, third line center? We'll see. But he's going to be between a first and a third line center in the NHL. It's very clear he's going to play. So if you looked at it, and had Quinn signed long term, and you look at the defense, the way it's set up, you have Coots coming through, you even have guys like Lekramaki, another pick coming this year. You can look at it and say, yeah, maybe this year isn't going to be our year, but are we now maybe one or two players away from being where we need to be and a lot closer to competing? And I think the mood would be a lot different around this team if Quinn was locked up long term. But because he's not, it creates all these existential questions about what is this team going to do if you don't keep Quinn Hughes? Do you have to trade everybody? I still don't believe in the idea of tearing it all down. I don't think you should be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think you should still hold on to a number of players that you have. But obviously, if Quinn doesn't stay, or says he doesn't want to be here, you do have to make some tough decisions. But, I do think what gets lost in all of this is the Canucks still have a relatively young roster with a lot of young pieces. And it doesn't necessarily have to be trading every single player in the organization to find a way to turn this around in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people talking about Hughes, and I mean, it's possible I spent too much time on Twitter this week. That wouldn't be anything new, but I'm sure you heard people criticizing Hughes' leadership in a couple of the last post-game interviews, and I'm not really. I mean, I don't know how I feel about it. I didn't really feel anyway, really, until I saw people complaining. I'm curious, like, do you think there's anything there? Are people just looking to validate their own opinions? Like, oh, Hughes is leaving. Look at this post-game interview as proof. Or Hughes is staying. Look at this post-game interview as proof. Or do you think there's something there? Is he getting fed up? Even though I think, if he was actually sat down and asked what the problem is, I feel like, although no hockey player would admit this, right? Because it would be viewed as an excuse, but it's injuries. It's got, at least 50% injuries, right? So is he pissed, or what's going on? What do you think?
Well, it's always hard to get into somebody's mind, right? And say with confidence, this is what this player is feeling. And you are right about the confirmation bias, because we're seeing a lot of that right now, whether it's you think a player's, like Pettersson, people who think his game is there, and anytime he does something good, it's like, oh, he's back. Look at this. Like, he just showed
Guilty
this and he's something different, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think, that's just fandom, like you're excited or you're down about something. And when you see things, you view through that lens, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it can kind of cloud the reality of the situation sometimes a little bit. And on Quinn Hughes specifically, because has Quinn ever looked happy in interviews? Right? Like,
doesn't look happy on the bench even.
Right. Like that's been the thing about Quinn. Even, in the best of days, he sits there with that kind of 1,000-yard stare in his eyes. That's just the way he is, right? You've seen him after wins, even. And yeah, every once in a while he'll be a bit lighter, but he's never been this player who's very expressive with his emotions and been very excited. He's very even, and maybe more on the low ebb of the even flow, right? Where he's kind of like more, I wouldn't say dour, but that's just the way his personality is. And when you talk to him in person and get a chance to chat with him, he's a nice guy. He's articulate. He's smart. He's a good person. There's a lot of things about him that are very positive. But with his post-game media avails, pre-game media avails, they've never been overly expressive or joyous. I will say, though, despite all that, he does seem more frustrated now than he has in recent years. But to me, it's not even so much the media stuff, because again, like I think we've seen him be like this in good times and bad times in the past. So I'm not sure it's any different now. Maybe slightly more curt the last game and than usual. And I think Demko getting injured did create a lot of frustration and disappointment with the team and the players. That man, this happened again. So I'm sure that played a part into it. But I think his body language on the ice has kind of been the thing that stood out to me the most, where you can tell he's getting frustrated. He slumps his shoulders. He smashes the stick a little bit, and he's not generally a player that does those sort of things. There was a game earlier this season. I can't remember which one it was, but the Canucks were down a goal. It was early in the third period, and he couldn't make a play at the blue line. And then he slumped his shoulders, smashed his stick, and walked off. And it was almost or just skated off. And it was almost as if the game was over. But it's still a 1-goal game. You're right there. So that type of frustration is something we haven't seen from Quinn. So clearly he's feeling frustrated because the team struggled, the fact that they've had their injuries. And I think he's a player who wants to will this team to victory and sometimes tries a bit too hard. I don't think that means he's checked out. But I do think he's been more frustrated than usual. But I think, trying to read into his post-game interviews or pre-game media avails, I think that can be a bit of a fool's errand, because it could be more about confirmation bias as opposed to this is an indicator of what he's trying to do or where where he is with the organization.
Yeah. No, I think that's pretty much how I feel too. Like, I think there's also an element of his frustration that comes from his own play. I mean, he's been great, Quinn Hughes, but do you agree that at the start of the season, it didn't seem like he was fully Quinn Hughes? I mean, we held him to such a high standard. He was still the best player on the team for basically every game, but and then the injury he suffered. I feel like he's also, definitely annoyed about that. But okay, switching it up for a sec, kind of going back on something you spoke or you touched on before. I keep hearing people say that Canucks ownership, or whoever you want to blame, are anti-rebuild, and that's why the team hasn't seen success since the early 2010s. But I don't know if this is a hot take, but I was thinking the other day, in the 7 years between 2013 and 2019, the Canucks had 9 first-round picks, 6 in the top 10, including 2 in the top 5. They got guys like Jared McCann, Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson. Not every pick panned out. Oli Ulevi, Hunter Shinkarik, Jake Virtanen. But whatever. My question is, was that not a rebuild?
It's a great point, because it was a rebuild, because to your point, I mean, you're picking high in 10 drafts, right? I mean, you had so many, poor seasons that you had a lot of first round picks that were of quality. I think the issue, you're right, because the Canucks also didn't trade first round picks during that time. The time they traded the first round pick was for the OEL trade, which we can get to coming up in a little bit if you want, in terms of how that played out. But I think the biggest gripe people have, because I've made the same point, it's not like the Canucks sat there and didn't rebuild or didn't pick high and weren't focused on the future. The thing was, they never embraced it in terms of this being our plan. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration came in, where they could have probably picked up more assets over the years if they would have embraced the longer term approach, instead of going out there and maybe getting some of these free agents and trying to expedite things. Because the problem was the Canucks also haven't had a ton of second round picks over the years. And the first round picks are great. You need those. But if you look at the teams that have had success, they've also had a bevy of second and third round picks, and they've hit on a number of them. Now, the Canucks have hit on a couple, of course, right? You look at Thatcher Demko. He was a second round pick. He's looked good. Höglander, second round pick, maybe not a top 6 player, but somebody who obviously can help you out and give you a little bit of something. But the separating factor for the teams like the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Chicago Blackhawks, when they went through their rebuild, whether they were trying to rebuild the way people say they did or not, especially before Chicago won their Stanley Cups, it was they picked up players like Duncan Keith. They picked up players like Nikita Kucherov and guys like Braden Point outside the first round. And the reason they did was because they had a number of second and third round draft picks, and they kind of embraced going with the asset accumulation standpoint of trying to get as many guys as you can and seeing what can fit over the course of a few seasons. Whereas when Benning was here initially, they traded a lot of second round picks and third round picks to get immediate help, like trading a second round pick for Sven Baertschi, for instance, trading third and fourth round draft picks for players to help them right now. And There is, like, I understand you're trying to insulate the young guys with some players who are capable, and you can't just have 18, 19-year-olds in your roster. But if you would have embraced the longer term outlook of, let's hold on to our draft picks, let's try to accumulate more of these second and third round draft picks, let's keep adding players to our prospect pool in the hopes of one or two of them becoming star level players. The Canucks never had that fill. It was only their own first round picks. They never got extra first round picks and made use of those outside of when they traded Ryan Kessler. They got the pick for Shinkarik. I mean, that's the only time they had two first round draft picks under the Benning regime. Every other time, if they were trying to do something, they were focused on getting players as opposed to draft picks. And the other part that was the
They
biggest
had two the
issue was,
Besser year, didn't they?
yeah, it was that.
Didn't they have two in when they drafted Besser and McCann, and then Virtanen
That was
and
the first.
Shinkarik as well?
Yeah, you're right. That's the. It was a Virtanen and Shinkarik and Virtanen, and then McCann. No, McCann and Virtanen, and it was Shinkarik and Horvat in the same year, I believe it
Oh,
was.
okay, okay.
Or I could be wrong on
Besser
it.
was
Or
2015. No, you're right. You're right.
yeah. But you're right. They had a couple of those guys, and they were at least doing a good job with the first round picks. And they only can't hit on all of them, but hitting on Pettersson was huge. Hitting on, of course, Quinn Hughes was absolutely amazing. So they did a good job on those things. But then the other thing they didn't quite embrace doing was they had some veteran players they could have moved and could have got assets for, and they just didn't do it. And we saw what ended up happening, with Chris Tanev. Eventually he walked as a free agent. That was a bit different after that bubble year. And, it was a bit different because you were trying to be competitive. You made the playoffs technically, and the biggest mistake maybe was not keeping them and then letting that kind of slide through. But that's, a different conversation. But the biggest issue was you probably could have had some more young talent over those years if you would have embraced the long-term approach instead of going out and signing guys like Louis Eriksson as well. Then Jay Beagle, for instance, and Antoine Roussel. So it wasn't so much about, just drafting high, because that's a big part of it. And you're right, they wouldn't have the core they had that gave you hope if you didn't make those picks for Pettersson and Hughes specifically, and even Thatcher Demko. But if you would have embraced it more fully and you would have maybe added some more assets and you would have taken a longer term approach in terms of not trying to get back quickly, could you have been in a better spot? And I think that's a fair criticism. But this idea that the Canucks have never picked high, you're right. I mean, they did pick high for a number of years. It wasn't a tear down rebuild, but it was perhaps a accidental rebuild to some extent. It was maybe a what do you want to call it, like a earnest attempt to be competitive that ends up being a rebuild for you. So it's more about the plan. I think a lot of people have issues with it's if you embrace being in the position you are and not trying to rush things, you can be in a better spot long term. And I think that's the biggest criticism for it.
You know what? That totally I understand now. That makes sense, because I'm going to adjust my take, or I guess it's not even a take, because I think what it was, you're right, it wasn't an embraced rebuild. It was a failed retool. And because of the failure when it came to the retool, they ended up with a few great picks. I think that's probably what it was, right? Because like they were trying to keep the team competitive while getting some young guys. The team wasn't competitive. The guys they brought on didn't work out, and that ended up in a couple top 5 picks, a 7th pick. So yeah, okay, I can see that. So are you? I think I know the answer here, but it probably all hinges on Hughes, I would assume. But are you team? If there's 3 options here, like rebuild, retool, or bulk up? I mean, I guess the question. I mean, yeah. Let's say Hughes doesn't want to. No, I can't even. I guess it. No, the question doesn't matter, because it all hinges on Hughes.
Well, that's the thing, right? It really does, because like if Quinn stays, I'm not even team bulk up so much. It's not even. I'm not saying sell, but I'm more like be patient. If Quinn has signed here long term, I don't think you should be chasing success this season. Not to say you shouldn't try to be a playoff team, but I don't think you should be overly aggressive and overspending on getting a centerman. Because if Quinn has said I'm staying here long term, not to say you can sacrifice this year, but I think the best course of action would be patient, keep your young guys in there, try to make a hockey deal that makes sense. I'm not against making any deal at any point in time. Can you get a center who's in his early 20s that fits in here long term, even if it costs something? Okay, great. I mean, you're talking about a forward who fits in. I mean, that's all fine and good. The thing is, it's so hard to make that deal. I mean, there aren't many centers or talented players in the early 20s available in the National Hockey League. So it's more of a pipe dream than a reality. But I'm not against that. But if Quinn had committed or says, I'm staying here, I actually kind of take the hands off the wheels a little bit and say, all right, let's play the season out. Let's see what happens. Keep our first round draft pick. And if we make the playoffs, great. We'll get some experience. The guys will get out there and play. If not, now we've kept our assets. We have another first round draft pick. We have Brandon Coots coming next season. We have some cap space, and let's approach things in the off season and be patient about how we build this team and move forward. And if you have Quinn locked up, you feel like you're going to be competitive still. You feel pretty good about at least being a team that's going to be able to push for a playoff spot. And now you have all these young guys coming through that give you a little bit of hope. And at the very least, you have more assets to play with. So you might be able to sacrifice a couple to make a bigger trade. And I think that would be my favorite course of action if Quinn Hughes stays. But if Quinn Hughes doesn't want to stay here, I don't think you have much of a choice. And I don't even mean trade everyone. Like I mentioned before, I think you have to make some tough decisions. Like if you know, for instance, this year that Quinn doesn't want to stay, and if you move him, you know it's going to take at least 3 years to get back to being competitive again, 2 to 3 years to get there. And at that point, does it make sense to give Sherwood, who's 30, a 4-year contract, right? And then what do? Do you trade him potentially at the deadline? And I love Sherwood. I'd love for them to keep him. But if Quinn's not staying here, do you have to make a tough decision and get the best asset you can? And do you look to maybe move 1 or 2 players with term on their deals that are in their 30s? Do you move one of the goalies, for instance? I think that you have to make that type of decision if Quinn doesn't want to stay, because you have to make sure that the age range for the team is still going to fit the bounce back in a couple of years. You don't want to be in a position where you hold on to some guys who in 3 years are 33, 34, and you kind of miss the window to get the best out of them and also move them to get what you need. So I think you have to make some tough decisions, but I don't believe in trade everybody. Like I think it's foolish to go out there and say, let's trade Hronek, let's go and trade Pettersson, let's go and trade Marcus Pettersson too, and like go and trade Garland, go and trade Besser, get rid of every single player that has term on their contract. Like to me, that's not the way to go about it either. And I think if you do that, you're going to make it even harder to turn things around in a few years, and you can get caught in a 10-year rebuild really easily. So I think the Canucks have enough youth. They have enough players that are in that kind of prime age range that it doesn't have to be a full-on tear down if Quinn doesn't want to stay here. You have to make a couple tough decisions, no doubt. You move Quinn because you have no choice, but I don't think you should be tearing it down to the studs if that happens.
Oh, man, the more I think about it, waking up to a tweet from the Canucks sometime next summer saying Quinn Hughes is re-signed for whatever amount of years, I think that is the solves everything. It solves every and it sucks that we have to wait that long to get an answer, potentially longer, probably longer, really. But because that's the truth. I mean, there are so many good things about this team right now. It's just losing Hughes, the prospect of losing Hughes, and if they do trade him, I would imagine they're going to go for picks and young guys, right? I mean. I guess I don't know. It really depends on kind of just what you were saying about whether or not they're going full rebuild or not. Speaking of Sherwood real quick, that's an interesting one because it's hard to say. I mean, he had a career year last year, but it looks like he's going to have completely surpassed that this season. So it's now kind of a question of, are we just witnessing a player reach his potential, or is this a guy, regardless of Hughes re-signing or not, is this a guy that we should be selling high, assuming we're out of the playoff race come the trade deadline? What do you think? What would you think there?
I'm a big Sherwood fan. I love Sherwood. Even when they signed him, I looked at him as being a player that could break out here. Now he's broken out more than I thought. So last year before the season, we were talking about what can you expect production wise, and I went out on a limb and said I'm taking over 14 and a half goals. I think this guy can score 15 plus goals in the National Hockey League because his shot's great. He's better than people think. He's quick. He's aggressive. He's a guy who's capable with a bigger role to score 15 goals in a season. Now he blew that out of the water, scored 19. This year he's on pace to score, 35, 40 goals, whatever it is he's on pace for at this stage. It's unreal, right? So
I think it's over 40.
Yeah, it's crazy. So he's been even better than I thought, and I was high on Kiefer Sherwood. So I would love for the Canucks to keep Sherwood because I think guys like that are hard to find, especially players that are physical or aggressive. Now he's not, an enforcer in that sense, but like in the new NHL, it's not that far off. A guy that can do the things he can, get under the skin of the opposition, isn't afraid of standing up for his teammates if he has to. So he's a rare player archetype that you can seldom find in the National Hockey League. But to your point, if Quinn, to me, it's dependent on Quinn, right? Because if Quinn stays, then, or if you get an indication by the deadline that there's a good chance you're keeping Quinn, I do what I can to sign Sherwood. And because I look at it and say he might have 2 more really good years before maybe he goes out of the prime or whatever. But I think it's worth it because you have Quinn, and maybe you can compete, and he can be a really nice player for you in the playoffs. And even in 3 years, if he's not scoring 20, with the intangibles and the physicality and the edge he brings, that's still a really nice player to have if you make the playoffs, to have bring physicality and make a difference for you. But if Quinn doesn't stay, do you pay for a player who's going to peak during your down years, and then when you get back up again, what is he going to provide for you? I just feel like he won't fit with the timeline of your team, as much as that pains me to say, if Quinn doesn't stay, and that's kind of where I'm at. And I would love to keep Sherwood. Again, like I'm as big a fan of Sherwood as you can find, and I love what he's done for this team. But I just don't know if you can sign a player into his 30s and pay him a premium after 2 career years and essentially have it be on a non-playoff team. I'm not sure that really helps you out. You know what I mean? And his value is probably not going to be any higher than it is at the deadline, because his salary is only 1.5 million. And you can get something really nice back in return. And you're also not dealing with more term on his contract that can make it more troublesome in a year to move. If he has a down year, or, in a year or two, or scores 12, 13 goals in a couple of years, and he's making 4.5 million or 4 million, it might be hard to move that contract. So, and I could live with that contract still being on the books if Quinn's here and if he scores a little bit less because of all the other things he brings, but he doesn't become a tradable asset for you. So I think it really is dependent on team direction and which way the organization is going. Because if they're going in a positive direction, you have to keep him. If not, I just don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, man. I agree with all that. It's just so many questions. We need the answer. Okay, one more question before you have to go here. What do you predict the score will be for tonight's game against the Carolina Hurricanes?
Oh, all right. You know what? Anytime we expect the Canucks to falter and fail, they find a way to win. I'm seeing a 3-2 Canucks win.
Hey, that's mine too.
Yeah, attaboy.
All right, that's a good sign. All right, well, thank you so much for coming on again, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, anytime. It's always fun chatting hockey with you. I wish it was under better circumstances, but who knows? Hockey's a funny thing, right? Just when it looks like everything's going to fall apart, things turn around, or just when it looks like last year, we all thought, hey, nowhere to go but up, and then it came crashing down. So maybe it'll be the inverse this year.
That's what I'm hoping for, man. Otherwise, it's going to be a really, really tough next, I guess, 6 or 8 months. Or how long are we? Yeah, 8 months till we find out anything about Hughes at the earliest. So, yeah, man. Appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Keep up the great work. I love your stuff on YouTube and your pod.
Oh, thank you, dude. Hey, you too. Listen to Canucks Central right before this call.
Love it, man.
See ya.
Appreciate it, man. Have a good one.